Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Benchwarmer Sports podcast. I'm Raffi, joined by Davian. Davian, there's a lot going on right now. The NBA and NHL respective finals have wrapped up. We'll get into those very shortly. The NBA offseason and NHL offseason are now underway. We've seen the NBA draft go to completion. NHL round one was last night as we're recording this podcast. Rounds 2 through 7 take place today. NBA and NHL free agency are next week as well. So thankfully, we have plenty to talk about on this podcast, and next podcast, and then we enter the dog days of waiting until the NFL season to begin. So before we get into that and everything else for this podcast, David, how are you? I know the Knicks haven't been super active over this past week since the NBA season has ended, but overall, how are you feeling? How are you doing? And how are things?
I mean, like the Knicks, I'm kind of happy the Knicks aren't active because we picked a player right in the NBA draft, who seems to be pretty good. Forgot his name, but the issue is that we don't have a coach. So I'm like, who's picking and why are we picking? Like, I would have traded away that pick. Other than that, Rafi, I'm doing pretty well. I'm repping my Hasbula shirt because UFC 317 is tonight. Ilya Topuria against Charles Oliveira. It should be like one of the greatest UFC fights we've seen in a while. So I'm pretty excited for that. And check out our TikTok, Benchwarmer_sports, for a prediction and recap on that fight. Any case though, Rafi, I've been doing pretty well. How have you been?
I've been good. Been kept busy by the NHL offseason, which has been underway. NHL free agency video live on the YouTube channel. Be sure to check
Watch
that
that,
out.
guys. It's a really good
NBA
video.
draft first round happened last night. We saw the Blackhawks take forward Anton Frundell from Djurgården in Sweden. Yes, I practiced how to say that numerous times before
That's
hopping
impressive,
onto this
Rafi. That's
podcast
very
because
impressive.
you see words in Swedish and you're like, I see letters that don't look like the letters that I know.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
trust me, I know Armenian, and those letters are even funkier. So I was able to push through and figure out how to say your gardens, even though it kind of doesn't look like
Impressive,
that. But
impressive, Rafi.
anyways, it's been good. Wish Michael Misa fell. I am a little bit upset with hockey media at this point, just because there's so many smoke screens. Everyone's like, "Oh, things are going to be so chaotic." I feel like every year people are like, "Oh, this is going to be a crazy draft. Oh, this guy might fall to the Blackhawks at 3," and sure enough, nothing happens. And I'm sitting here like, okay,
Yeah.
thanks for all the hype and all the rumors of, oh, something might go down. So we'll get into some of the things that did happen, but overall was definitely more disappointing overall. And the NHL draft, they decentralized it. They did it in one location, and they did it NFL draft style. And to tell you the first round was tough to watch was it would be an understatement. It was a painful 4.5 hours for me to watch that whole first round. Thankfully, I didn't have anything really better to do, so I was able I just kept it on. But we need to go back to the localized. Everyone comes together. You can see everyone at their respective draft tables at the draft. It's so much better, and I think collectively everyone agrees that we need to go back to that and not what the NBA, NFL does, where it's more like the players show up and then that's kind of it, and then everyone has their own war room. So please go back to the format that we've been in, and I think the NHL will do that. But outside of that, I'm doing well and excited to get into things. So before we get into more hockey stuff, we'll start off with the NBA. NBA Finals wrapped up this past week. Thunder win in 7 games. We'll start off with obviously the big story and really unfortunate story of Tyrese Halliburton. First quarter hits three threes, off to a really good start, and then unfortunately tears his Achilles. Feels like it really sucked the life out of that entire game. I know a lot of people were comparing the NHL when the Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup and the NBA Finals when the Thunder won the NBA Finals, and they're like, look at the passion in the NHL, look at the versus no celebration on the NBA. I think part of that was just the fact that we were all hoping for a really good game. And I think if the Thunder had won a really close game or a game where Tyrese Halliburton's healthy and just it's going back and forth, I think there would be a little bit more emotion. But I really do think that injury sucked the life out of, especially the Pacers, and they wound up losing this game. But also the Thunder as well at the end of the day, because obviously it's great to win the championship, but I feel like it kind of left a bad taste in their mouth too, where it's like we wanted to really beat the best, and we unfortunately didn't get to see the best out of Tyrese Halliburton for that entire game.
Yeah, Rafi, I have to agree with you on that. I think that was definitely part of the Thunder's reaction. I think another part of it is, I think it's just the players on the Thunder, like with SGA, Hardenstein, like these are very mellow players. They're not very, they don't go out to the media and they're not trying to be rambunctious. They're not very, like aggressive players. And the storyline was there's no like crazy storylines in a way. I felt like in this NBA Finals, like yeah, the Pacers, of course, like the underdogs coming up to like beat these play this OKC team like the best in the league, and they still are the best in the league, and it's going to be a dynasty if we're ever going to see one really still in the NBA. I think besides that, though, if we take a holistic view of the NBA Finals, I think it was a great finals. But at the same time, Rafi, like we discussed prior, the viewership numbers were down, and it's simply because you can have as great of a series as you want, but if you have two small market teams where nobody really cares about them, you're not going to have that many people watching. No one's turning on their TV who's not a big NBA fan to watch SGA shoot free throws or to watch Tyrese Halliburton, use some dark magic. As an NBA fan, yes, that was one of the greatest finals we've seen in a while. Honestly, you could go back to 2016 Cavs Warriors that also went to Game 7. As Bill Russell once said, the best two words in sports is Game 7. Simple as that. It was an absolutely amazing series to watch, and I guess jumping into the NHL finals as well, I think that was a great series to watch as well. It was a back and forth. It was aggressive. It was energizing. And Rafi, like you said, like we talk about, like like the Panthers didn't, the Thunder didn't show emotion. While on the other side, the Panthers, who are, you're winning back to back, you'd think like, oh, it's just whatever. It's like another championship for them, right? But it seemed like when you're watching that celebration, it's like for many of them, it was the first time winning, especially Brad Marchand. And, it'll be interesting to, we'll discuss this possibly later. And I know you discussed in your video, NHL free agency video, where he would go after, being in Florida. But like for a player like him, who I think it was the entire NHL community was pretty happy. Well, not entire, but some people in the NHL community were just
No one in
happy.
Toronto enjoyed that, but
Yeah,
yes, for
exactly.
the most part, a lot of people did.
But a lot of people enjoyed seeing a player like Marchand finally gets pick up the Stanley Cup. And I think it was a great finals. But Rafi, I know you watched almost. I'm pretty sure you watched every game. I feel like you could comment more so on the gameplay and. I guess the future of the NHL, whether it's going to still be Edmonton versus Panthers, if they're both two dynasty teams, or if we're going to see somebody else come out of the West.
Yeah, obviously, glad you mentioned Brad Marchand. We're getting summer of OV vibes when Ovechkin won his first Stanley Cup with Brad Marchand. Even though Brad Marchand did win the Stanley Cup in 2011, I believe that was his rookie year, if not his
Yeah.
second year. But regardless, finally Stanley Cup champion again. Had made two other finals trips. One losing to one of the greatest teams of all time, the 2013 Chicago Blackhawks. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a Blackhawks fan. Look at the start to the season they had. I think they went the first 25 games only losing one game in overtime or something like that. It was a ridiculous start to the season. That 2013 Blackhawks team was incredible. And then 2019, we don't talk about 2019. 2019 didn't happen, doesn't exist. But anyways, Brad Marchand gets his Stanley Cup again. Obviously, the memes, the Dairy Queen, everything's just been great. And I love what the Florida Panthers did. They handed it off to Seth Jones. They handed it off to Vitek Vanacek. They handed it off to all these guys who did not win a Stanley Cup yet, and you go captain first. Barkov holds it, and then he let everyone who had not hoisted the Stanley Cup yet hoist it first and do that whole thing before everyone else got their second chance with the Stanley Cup. So I thought that really stood out, and it was a really nice touch by the Florida Panthers. It was a really hard fought series. Panthers go back to back. Similar to the NBA Finals, Panthers Oilers did not get the attention or the audience that you'd expect just because for the most part most people at least in the United States like seeing two American teams go at it in two more prominent markets. If this was Blackhawks Bruins like it was in 2013, there'd be a much larger amount of people watching. Blackhawks Rangers, we know the Blackhawks would likely win that matchup, but anyways, Blackhawks
Sure, sure.
Rangers or a original six team potentially like Toronto or Montreal taking on Chicago, etc. So when you get those original six teams or some of the more prominent American markets, you're going to get a better overall audience. It's surprising too that you think that with the NBA at finals at watch ratings being down, you think that okay, the NHL is probably recouping some of that. But really I felt
Yeah.
like both NBA finals and Stanley Cup finals, the audience was a little lower in numbers. And I think again that's just because the promise of the markets and people some people trail off right when their team loses. They're like, I don't really care who ends up winning. And then there's me who's knows everyone except for like the Skirdiff guy who got traded for a second round pick to the Washington Capitals from the Florida Panthers. But overall, we'll get into the technical side of things really quick, so I don't need to ramble too long. Really good series by the Florida Panthers. The first couple of games were really hard fought between both sides. Connor McDavid really was shut down for the most part this series, and I think that was the key reason why the Florida Panthers were able to win. The Florida Panthers do a great job taking away the other team's best players. We saw it versus Toronto Maple Leafs. We saw it versus the Carolina Hurricanes. The Florida Panthers are really good at that, and they really did their best to really stop Connor McDavid before he can get any momentum. If you watch some of that tape over, Connor McDavid, the moment he enters that neutral zone across center ice, there's already 2-3 Panthers players already ready to just completely close in on him, making it very hard for him to create anything. And sometimes he would get out of that, but you can't escape 3 players constantly. The Panthers bruised them up a lot, and at the end of the day, the Oilers' depth that had taken them so far, and it was a big reason why they made it all the way to the Stanley Cup final, really dried up, and that's a big reason why the Florida Panthers wound up winning the Stanley Cup and why the Oilers wound up losing back-to-back. In terms, to answer your final question of can these two teams make it to the Stanley Cup final again next year, the Oilers, you have a couple questions just with your depth. You're going to be losing a couple depth pieces. How are you going to replenish that? Evan Bouchard is going to be getting $10, $11 million likely on his next contract, which is going to kick in next year. And then Davian, as we've talked about before, Connor McDavid is going to be the highest player in the NHL next year or season after that, as his contract expires after this upcoming season. And he's getting at least $16 million in my mind. Whatever he says to the Oilers will sign him to that. We'll see if it winds up being 8 years or less. And then for the Panthers, you keep Sam Bennett, 8x8. Love that contract. That's exactly what I predicted in my NHL free agency video. We'll see if they can bring back Ekblad and Marchand. Marchand, I would be surprised if he wound up leaving Florida. I predicted him to leave Florida, but I wouldn't be shocked if he took a little bit of a discount to stay in Florida. I think it was a great fit, and he really fits in on that third line playing
Agreed. Yep.
16, 17 minutes a night. And then you have Aaron Ekblad, who could be a top pair defenseman, a little iffier, but he would be the top defenseman available in free agency. I think that from what I've been seeing online from those insiders, I wish I was an insider, but I'm not. It seems like they're pretty far off, so I do expect Ekblad to be entering the open market, which means that overall Florida's top four does take a step back. So can these teams make it back next year? Surely, but I do think some other teams are going to take some big steps and could potentially take a run at taking down Florida. If you put a gun to my head and said, pick a team, one of these two to make the Stanley Cup final, once again next year, I take the Florida Panthers, though.
I mean, so would I. I mean, this is a team that, it seems like they're going to keep together most of their, their key core players are still going to be on the team. With Bennett resigning, I just don't see how this team is not a Stanley Cup contender next year.
100%. And we'll move into more off-season content now that we discussed both finals. And we'll start off with the NBA draft. So I've yapped for far too long, so I'm going to take a little bit of a break. And Davian, let's talk about this NBA draft. Cooper Flag goes 1. Can't wait for him to get traded for a defensive stalwart in a couple of years. Chanting fire Nico once again. But Cooper Flag was the easy pick. Got taken at 1. Dylan Harper at 2. Overall, draft went pretty chalk. Ace Bailey, there's a lot of talk that he potentially did not want to go to Utah. But David, from what you've been seeing, I've been seeing that he's kind of been adopting going to Utah over the past couple of days. I know initially when he was taken, a lot of people were like, oh, this might go bad. But it looks like Utah bet on their intuition. They're like, you know what? He's by far the best player. We'll deal with this if we have to. And it looks like he's at least adopting it, or at least giving Utah a chance to really show them what their team's all about.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that all the talk was for him to end up on the Hornets, honestly. I think that was the biggest thing. That's why he wanted to drop out of the top 5, which kind of looks bad for Rutgers. They were going to have potentially two players going in the top 3 picks, but, that's definitely didn't happen. But look, at the end of the day, right, Cooper Flag, we all knew he was going to go number 1. Dylan Harper, the Spurs could have traded this pick, and there's a lot of talk about it, but, with Victor Wembanyama being only 21 years old, he's only 21, Raffi, and he's playing like a star. You have Stefan Castle in the backcourt. You have De'Aaron Fox. With Dylan Harper, there could be a question about whether, he'll mesh well with them, but he's a young star-studded player. Like, why would you try to trade that away? Stick there, stay in your number 2 spot, get an absolute amazing prospect, and and he's young too. He has time to develop.
I
76ers
think the
get
value too, not to cut you off, I think the value is really good too
yeah,
to
the
take a
value's
guy
really high.
like
Yeah,
guys like Cooper Flag, Dylan Harper, these guys who are like plug and play impact players. You don't need to pay them $40 million for a couple years down the line. And when you haven't
exactly.
paid
Yeah,
Victor
you have
Wembanyama
5
yet,
years. Yeah,
you could really we see what just happened with the Thunder. They have yet to dish out some of those big max extension contracts yet.
exactly.
So for the Spurs right now, getting all those players on young contract on little contracts, then that gives them the opportunity to add. We'll get into this shortly, but they were in on Kevin Durant, etc. You can afford to take on a really. Then you have 3, 4 superstar caliber players just because you have so many really solid young players on those rookie deals, which I think goes a long way.
100% agree. And we go through the rest of this draft. I mean, Edgar Demon to the Nets was a kind of a bit of a more of a surprise. Nobody, some people didn't expect him to go that early. But I mean, look, the Nets had 5 draft picks in this first round, so they basically can have a rookie starting lineup, which is just insane to me. Just to say that it would be a big man lineup, but in any case, I think the biggest surprise was really the Grizzlies picking Yang Hansen at 16. It's just very odd because on one side, Hanson's agent is Rich Paul. Rich Paul, everyone knows who that is. He's LeBron James' agent. He's the agent to so many players, and I'm sure that he gave an insight to the tried to really glaze this guy up for these NBA these NBA GMs, but I just don't get how you take him that early because it's one thing coming from Europe, right, where there's a pretty high level of competitiveness in the European leagues. The Chinese leagues are a joke. I'm sorry, like that's just the truth. Like that's why they always say like, "Oh, get ready to go play for the Guangdong Dragons," when a player's not playing well. Any case, that was a surprise. Jumping a bit earlier, back to pick 13, Derek Queen. The Pelicans trade up 10 spots to pick Derek Queen. Like, not they traded up, but not that wasn't the problem. They traded their first round pick from next year for Derek Queen, and that's a really bold move for a guy that's seen as a very developmental like player. Derek Queen, I think, is an amazing player. I mean, I think he really showed his leadership, his prowess at Maryland this past year. But he's undersized. He's not as athletic. It'll be interesting to see like what his fit will be on the team. But I think it was very much of a surprise. I guess kind of going through it, Walter Clayton Jr. I think it was pretty good by the Utah Jazz to trade up for him. It's surprising he fell all the way down to 18. A lot of European players, a lot of French players went throughout this draft. It was pretty interesting just to see that as well. Liam McNeely falling to 29 was a bit of a surprise, and I think that the Hornets really, I think that was like a huge move by them trading up. Rasheer Fleming was the biggest name in I think day two, and with the Suns trading up to get him, I think that they're really trying to build up a young core. And they're using the pieces that they got from the Rockets trade, even though I don't think they got enough, and we could talk about that later. I think that was a pretty good trade by them. And I think just kind of like throughout the rest of the draft, there wasn't anything too kind of big that I would like to talk about. But Rafi, was there any players or anything that kind of surprised you or like interested you throughout this draft?
Yeah, you hit it on the head with Yang getting taken by the Grizzlies. I know that was a lot of people were a bit surprised. 7 feet tall, you kind of get the Yao Ming comparison. But as you mentioned, the China League, we'll see if that winds up. I think it's a worthy selection. I think I'm pretty sure Zach Edey's also on the Grizzlies too, if I remember correctly. Correct.
Zach Edey is on the Grizzlies. Yep, he's been
So
injured.
if Hansen hits his potential, then you could potentially have Edey and Hansen, or you get Edey in your
Which would be
starting five,
insane.
and
Yeah.
then okay, coming off the bench is Hansen. Those are some redwoods if I've ever seen them. Overall, I think the one thing that I am confused about, and maybe you can shed some light on this because I don't know the whole structure of the NBA, but for the Nets to take all five, or let's see, one, two, three, four, all
Yeah,
four other first round picks and their second round pick in the second round, I'm really surprised they did not move some of those picks just because are they even going to sign all 5 of these guys? Are these guys even going to? Are they all going to the G League, or some of them going to be in the G League? Some of them are going to be with the NBA team. You only have 11 spots normally in a typical NBA lineup. I can't imagine all these guys are going to wind up playing for the Brooklyn Nets at some point.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you have G League, you have two-way contracts. I mean, I think that honestly, like, I think that's a good point to bring up. I think that, you know, they're trying to be a young team, trying to restructure. I mean, they're going to lose probably Cam Thomas. I don't know if they're going to resign him or not. So, I mean, there's a lot of questions for the Nets. I mean, it's a team that, hasn't really had an identity since KD and Kyrie really left. Um, I think it's a good point. I think a lot of them will be in the G League, kind of like you mentioned, um, and they'll kind of work their way up. And also, maybe they'll just roster all 5 players and let them develop really together. Um, I think there's a lot of things that they could go about it. I think let's wait for the summer league before we really start saying anything, and we'll see kind of what happens in a way. I think besides that, I think it was interesting to keep all 5 picks when there's so many players that potentially willing to get traded. I mean, with Giannis, with KD, it's surprising you would keep them instead of trying to trade for one of those players. But trying to protect your cap space and everything, and waiting for free agency to happen. I also don't blame the Nets for doing that.
Yeah, we'll see what winds up happening. Again, the other thing to think about too is if the Brooklyn Nets were to hit on all 5 of these picks too, all their contracts are going to be lined up to where they're going to have to pay all these people at the same time.
At the same time,
in all odds, not all of them are going to hit, but you do run into
we'll
that
trade a
scenario
few of them. Yeah, they'll definitely trade.
I would have liked to have seen personally the Nets move up in the draft if they really liked another guy, or potentially use some
I
of those
don't
picks
think
and trade back for a future first round pick instead.
Rafi.
We stocked up for the other year.
Rafi, I honestly don't think any of these teams in the top 5 were gonna trade their picks. I think they were really set.
No. I don't think anything like that. But if you like the guy at 12,
Yeah.
we saw the Pelicans trade a first round pick. One of
Yeah, I mean, they
their
could have moved up, but like they picked at 8, right? So it's like at that point, like you're picking your best player, unless there's somebody else that like you saw like fall. I feel like there's no point of like trading up.
Yeah, I just think they could have either moved up with some of those later picks, or potentially even with
Agreed.
some of those
Yeah,
picks for
yeah. I feel like
future
they could have done a lot.
first round picks in future years, and take the chance of maybe the other team is worse than they were expected to be, and then
Yeah,
maybe you get a
exactly.
little
Yeah,
bit of
yeah.
a better
True.
pick, deeper draft as well. I don't know exactly how deep of a draft this was, etc. I know the top 5 was really solid, but we'll see what winds up happening. Let's get
Yeah.
into 2 trades. And speaking of first round picks, the Orlando Magic traded a bunch of first round picks, 5 first round picks,
Oh my god.
to the Memphis Grizzlies
For
Desmond Bane.
Bane.
Desmond Bane, I've seen a lot of stuff that Desmond Bane is a great fit for the Orlando Magic in their starting 5.
Well, he's just not worth
Davian, what are
that
your
much.
thoughts?
I mean, like, yeah, like here, I'll jump in because this kind of infuriated me because, like, I feel like this is a Magic team. I was like, really, I felt like they had a great future coming up. They lacked a shooter, 100%. So you pick up Desmond Bane, a great shooter. Don't get me wrong. I saw the trade. I was like, all right, cool. Magic pick up a shooter. But then you go into the details. I'm like, why are you trading so many first round picks? Like, what do you mean, like, you're trading that much for Desmond Bane? And what do you mean that it seemed like Desmond Bane had more value than Kevin Durant? And we'll talk about that trade too. It was just like, I was just shocked, really. I mean, it's like, I don't know what's more disgusting: the Magic rebranding the team, like they're like whatever, like rebranded a logo and jerseys, or this trade. I mean, I really hope it works out for the Magic because I think they're a great young team. I think they're fun to watch. They made it to the play-in this year. They made it to the playoffs. But man, like, come on, like, why would you trade that much for a guy like Desmond Bane? I don't know. Kudos to the Grizzlies. I mean, like, wow, like what a steal. What a steal.
Yeah, 100% agree. Let's move over to the Kevin Durant trade now that you indicated earlier. And again, Kevin Durant, older in age, so that could potentially be a big reason why Desmond Bane, I believe, is 24, 25, 26 years old in that age range. So I guess maybe that's why. And the Magic are like, we're going to consistently be a playoff team. We have a young, solid core that, as you mentioned, made the playoffs this past year. So maybe they're like, these picks are going to be in the late 20s, so maybe that's why they were more motivated. But Kevin Durant gets traded from the Phoenix Suns to the Houston Rockets. We've been hearing about this all year, and it finally happens in the summer. Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, pick number 10, and a boatload of second round picks go to Kevin Durant. 2032 second round pick. That is, we're currently in 2025, so 18. That they traded an 11-year-old for Kevin Durant, which is kind of crazy to think about. Dave, and your thoughts on the Kevin Durant trade? The Rockets had a really good year this past year. Seem to have been taking that next step. You have a really young core. Now you have add Kevin Durant. Your thoughts?
It's interesting because this is a Rockets team that finished second in the West, right? That lost to a Warriors team that clearly, with so much playoff experience, it was expected that it was going to be a very competitive. Wow, sorry for the yawning. A very competitive series, and so trading for him was a very, very interesting decision. But also, when your main player that you're trading is Jalen Green, and then just a few picks, and you're picking up Kevin Durant, I think that's huge, right? I mean, you're bringing in a veteran presence, and it's exactly what you were looking for. This is exactly what the Nets were looking to do when they traded for Kevin Durant. And I honestly think that there's no better team out there that's a better fit for Kevin Durant. And I really do think that, uh, you know, Jalen Green, he was a good player, but he wasn't amazing. And a lot of Rockets fans I saw were like okay with him leaving. And like this is now like you bring Kevin Durant back to a city that he used to play in, just across like a state they used to play, not city, because he played at UT Austin. And so I think that this is a great, absolutely amazing trade, and I really do think that the Rockets are going to be a very, very serious contender again. And this is exactly, if I was Rockets, this is exactly what I would have wanted to do. Now, if I'm the Suns, I'm sorry, but I don't know why you could have gotten way more. I personally felt this is Kevin Durant. This is a future Hall of Famer, and you're getting basically like a few bags of chips for him. I honestly think that on paper this trade seemed to be somewhat fair, but then you start looking into it like this is Kevin Durant. This isn't Desmond Bane. I don't get why. I feel like the Suns got fleeced in a way. I really think that given the market, the trade market, and the way it operates, I think they could have gotten way more. And if I'm a Suns fan, I'm disappointed. But I'm also happy that, get a player like Jalen Green. I get a bunch of picks, and we can look on to the future. Because it clearly just like Kevin Durant, it just clearly couldn't have worked. But the thing is now, you have three shooting guards on the Suns now. You have Jalen Green, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker. So I don't know how that's going to really work. I mean, the Suns definitely picked up some, had a good draft, I think, trading up and down, really getting some young guys that I think that these vets can really train up and getting some, I think they picked some big men. I haven't really analyzed their drafts, but, I think the Suns are well positioned for the future and to regrow as a team. The Rockets, pick up an expensive contract in Kevin Durant, but they're immediate championship contenders. Immediate, Raffi, in my eyes. But Raffi, I know you're not as big of an NBA fan, but I'm curious to know, Kevin Durant's a well-renowned player. What do you think of this trade?
I mean, it's a classic. We're trying to get over the hump and cement ourselves as an NBA championship caliber team. That's exactly what it is. You hit it on the head, nail on the head quite well. You are the second seed this past year. You lose to a team like the Warriors, who it was a very good series for the most part, very, very close. And now you're adding Kevin Durant to the mix. Again, similar story to what I said about the Spurs, similar to what I was saying about the Thunder. Very young team, not a lot of guys on big contracts yet. So you add one of those big contracts, you go out and pick up a Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant, still Kevin Durant, which I agree with you. I was surprised that they only got Jalen Green. Again, I heard the same stuff you were seeing online too, where people were more like, okay, like if he can hit his potential, maybe we regret it a little bit. It's still Kevin Durant. You're getting him for at least a year, if not 2 years. And then also pick number 10. I think for the Rockets, you have enough young pieces and enough really solid young pieces to where you can afford trading off some of those other guys. I think Kevin Durant, alongside Thompson as well, is going to be really, really solid for this Rockets core. And again, it's a classic. We're right there. Let's take that next step, and picking up Kevin Durant certainly does that. David, do you think the Suns tear things down to the studs, or do you think that they look to do more of a retool? As you mentioned, they have three guards now in Jalen Green, Bradley
Yeah,
Beal, and Devin
I don't
Booker.
know.
I know Bradley Beal's on a pretty bad contract that's starting to age a little poorly. He's getting up there in age. Maybe they look to potentially move off or just ride out the rest of his
Yeah.
contract. But what do you see happening with the Phoenix Suns
I honestly
over
think
the
it's a
next
start
year
of a
or two?
rebuild. I really do think it's a start of a rebuild. I don't think you can retool per se. I think this is a really start of a rebuild unless some of the young guys that you just picked in the draft really show up and show out in the beginning of the season, and you're like, okay, well maybe we could actually make a run. And you trade a player like Bradley Beal, you trade a player like Grayson Allen, maybe, um, and really try and retool. But it's not like I say rebuild, but the thing is, it's not like a full out rebuild because you still have Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Grayson Allen, Jalen Green. I fumbled this pen like the Suns fumbled this trade. Um, so really, in that case, I think it'll be interesting to see. It really depends. Again, I think how they start off playing and what they do in free agency as well. I think the KD trade made sense for the Suns. Like it clearly wasn't. It was clear an experiment that just failed, and it sucks for the Suns because I feel like there's so many teams that have failed with the KD experiment. But hopefully, it's successful for the Rockets. I really hope it is. But in any case,
100%. So we'll see what ends up happening. More off-season stuff hopefully will be along the way as both the NBA and NHL hit free agency next week. So surely, I know the NBA, there's a lot more turnover, especially in the trade department than in hockey. So there'll surely be more trades, and that'll be great topics to discuss in future weeks. So that'll do it for this edition of the Benchwarmer Sports podcast. Davian, always a pleasure talking to you. A lot going on right now just because NBA and NHL finals are all wrapped up, and now we're in the grunt of the off season now. We have the drafts that just happened, and now free agency just about to occur as well. So stay tuned. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel as well for more off season content. And as always, have a good one. See ya.
peace.